Hello and welcome out to our Jitterbit Tech Talk. My name is Jared Stone.
And I am Corey Willis.
And we are really excited to have each and every one of you on this Tech Talk today. So first, let's start off by saying, happy holidays, happy New Year. New Year, new you, right? That's what they say. So we hope you have a lot of, had a good time on holiday, first off. But beyond that, we hope we have a great 2019 ahead of us. A lot of goals that are being set now, forecasted for a very great, very prosperous 2019. So hopefully we can add some value today to your integration life, and as we talk into some stuff around Jitterbit. So how was your holiday, Corey? Pretty good?
Oh yeah, we had a great time. Got to spend some good time with family, and it's always good when you get to be around family. So
family and food always make for the perfect combination, in my opinion. So yeah, lots of family time and lots of food. But nevertheless, for those that may be joining for the very, very first time, a Tech Talk, what is it? Well, Corey, what is a Tech Talk? What are we doing here?
On Tech Talks, we talk tech.
I think Corey spun that term, or that phrase.
Yeah,
so he gets all the credit.
Coined it one day on our Tech Talks, but yeah, we just talk tech. We talk we dive into Jitterbit and talk about various topics. And each time we have a specific topic that we dive into. But here's the cool thing is that at the end of these sessions, we open up for Q&A. And our commitment to you is that we are here to answer your questions, and we are going to do our best to stay on as long as possible, as long as you have questions. So regardless whether it is directly applicable to the topic for today or not, feel free. If we can answer the question, we'll do our best to answer it. If we can't, we'll let you know, and we'll get it followed up on after the Tech Talk. But we do like to answer as many as we can live and get some of that interaction going.
Sure. So kind of what Corey was saying there, I'll piggyback off that. Our Tech Talks are typically 45 minutes, but like he said, go ahead as questions come about in your mind. You can chat those over through the Zoom questions panel there. And we'll answer those at the end, or if something is applicable at that moment, we may jump in and answer that. And if we don't, we'll answer those at the. If we don't have the answer, we'll get an answer some way.
So in the Zoom control panel that you're using, there's a Q&A section.
Perfect.
And that's where you would submit those questions over, and we'll see them as they come through, and get those answered as they come.
Perfect. Cool. So before we get into today's content, let's talk some about, we do have a new release that's coming about here in just a few days. Mm-hmm. This is going to be Harmony 9.7, okay? So in EMEA, that's going to be released just in 2 days on the 10th. January 10th, that's going to be released. And then over in, or here in the US, I should say, is going to be released on the 14th. So be looking out for that. A lot of good releases that are going to be coming about in that. So.
And those release notes are out on Success Central.
Mm-hmm.
Always a great resource for you to go see what's going on in the world of Jitterbit.
Perfect. So moving on into today's topic, okay, we're going to be talking about API Proxy. Now, I believe, if memory serves me correct, in our last Tech Talk, we kind of mentioned it because this was coming out.
It had just come out.
That's right, it was coming out.
It was in the 9.6 release, I believe.
Mm-hmm. So we kind of hit on it, but as you all know, how do we come up with these topic ideas? Well, they're coming from you guys. So, you're delivering that information to, your customer success manager, or maybe even a partner manager on the other side of that thing. But nevertheless, that's coming through those channels. And, we heard that you wanted to hear about API Proxy, new feature. So we're talking about that today. So I guess, Corey, the first place we could start at is, what is an API Proxy?
Yeah. So API Proxy, this is something that's out there in the market. And there are entire platforms built around being an API proxy. API management is kind of what you would see those lumped under, but essentially it's a platform that sits out there that allows you to proxy existing APIs, aggregate those together to where you can consolidate the URLs, the structure that you have there, put in security, monitoring, just different things like that. Brings in logging capabilities, but the catch is that you have to have an existing API. So you already have to have an API built, but the API management sits on top of that and provides that value-added service, so to speak. And so now within Jitterbit, the cool thing is that we brought in API Proxy within the API manager. You get to that by going out to login.jitterbit.com, mm-hmm. and right there you can create API proxies. So you can proxy any existing APIs that you have. And the really neat thing with this feature, we've always really been able to do this, okay? But in the past, we had to use the Design Studio to build that API pass-through, essentially, where we're going to call an API and we're just going to pass through its results direct to the requester. And so we're doing the same thing, but you had to design the project within the Jitterbit Studio. Now, if all you're wanting to do is to proxy an API, you can do that direct in the API Manager. Now, this does still give you some really cool abilities. So you can still bring in your security profiles. You still get all the logging capabilities. You can also do some really cool things with the Portal Manager to document the APIs. You can do things like the IP whitelisting, basic auth, OAuth 2.0. I know I'm missing some. We'll see some as we dive into the examples on what that can do. But if you're not needing, if you do not have a requirement to work with the data itself from the original API, API Proxy is your way to go, and we want to show you some of that today.
Okay, cool. So that kind of gives you a good overview of what that is for those that, you know, are new to this this area in this space. Okay, so I guess the next place we can go is let's just go ahead and dive in to a couple of examples that we've got for you guys, and hopefully that will shed some light to the topic here.
Okay, so let's go ahead and switch over to my screen here, and we'll take a look at building an API proxy from scratch. I'm going to go ahead and log in to the Jitterbit portal here. And so this is a brand new org we just spun up today for this. And so here we are in our Jitterbit Tech Talk org. I'm going to descend into my API Manager, and I don't have anything in here yet. I do have a project we'll dive into a little bit later, but for right now, we've got nothing here. You can see the API Manager. It is blank at this point. Just got to wait for my my screen to finish loading here. And what we're going to do, you kind of see it grayed out over here already, the new proxy button. This is what we're going to use. In the past, we've done tech talks where we've talked about APIs and we've built them using the new API button over here. This is the proxy feature that we're talking about. So I'll go ahead and click New Proxy. Now, the proxy that I'm going to use today, I just went out and I found something that a lot of us will understand, but it's just a publicly available proxy. It's actually for a Bitcoin price index to see what the current price is. I believe it's from CoinDesk. One of the common ones out there. And apologies, it looks like my system is just running a little slow here today. But proxy name, this is the first thing. What do we want to call it? And so I'll just call it Bitcoin. We'll just leave it at that for now. Now the version. You can do a lot of different things with the version. Always recommend it for being able to do updates down the road without deprecating old APIs. So I'll go ahead and put V1 on here. Choose what environment. The API proxies, they are tied to an environment, just like everything else in Jitterbit. I'll choose my Tech Talk environment. And now I have here my service root. Okay, so I'll leave that as it sits right there. Just call it Bitcoin. You can put a description, would recommend that. For now, I'll just skip that though. I'll go ahead and turn on debug mode. I just always do this. It's something we've gotten in the habit of when we create one. We just go ahead and turn it on because I'll tell you, if something's going to go wrong, it's probably going to go wrong right when you build it, right?
Yep.
So we do that. I'll go ahead and enable cores. Cores is an option that you may want to consider. It gives some extra functionality when it comes to the portal in the portal manager and being able to interact with the API rather than just documenting it. So it is a security concern in some scenarios, so you do want to evaluate that on whether you want to turn it on. Notice it was off by default. I'll go ahead and turn it on for our sake for now though. And then click Next. Now at this point, I get to put in what my existing API is. I've already copied this, I believe. There it is. So api.coindesk.com is the one I'm calling. Now this is the complete API here. This is the current price.json. I'm actually going to remove that. And I'm going to leave it just like that. Because there's a really cool feature in this, in that a lot of APIs, you're going to have a service root such as this, the V1 BPI, and then you're going to have different little services that are tied off of that.
Sure.
Well, with a proxy, you can decide what you want to expose. You don't have to expose everything, right? So we'll leave that. You can do some open API stuff here too. That is for the documentation. I'll just leave that as no and move on. And now I can define my services. So this is what I was talking about, that you can define what services you want to expose from that original API. So service name, well, first one's going to be current price. So I'll type that in. and put in my path. Now I do need to start that with a slash, so I'll drop that in. So current price.json, that's going to be that service, and it's going to be a get method, and I'll add that service. Now that brings it in down here. You see that. Now I'll add another one. There is another one here, and I noted it down. This is historical, so I'll just put historical close. That's what we're going to be looking at. So let's see if I can type this in correctly here. There we go. Historical slash close.json. That is what that API has. You can go out to the actual API documentation for the original, see that. But again, I'll choose get. Now, say I had 10 different services in that API, but I only wanted these 2. That's one of the cool features here with API Proxy, is that you can control that. And where it really comes in is in one of our next steps. We'll go ahead and move over there. But this is where we get into security profiles. Now, Jared, tell us some about security profiles, because I know you've been in there working with us some. You can do a lot of different things in security profiles, right?
Yeah, so Corey, go ahead and kind of show the drop down there. So if you select, you can create a new one there. So, based upon, who you want actually accessing this information, you can do that. You see there you have anonymous, basic, OAuth 2.0. Definitely some things there that you can leverage. And then once you create these security profiles, you can save that information and then tie that back to the specific API proxy that you're creating, allowing some security around that.
So from a proxy aspect and talking about how we can limit which services are exposed, we could create various security profiles and say we want to expose those 2 API services with one security profile. But then maybe we want to create another proxy that has, if there's 10, maybe all 10 services, and that has a different security profile. So you can segment that however you need to for your needs. Of course, we've also got the trusted IP ranges in here. You've got custom header logging, different things like that. We're not going to do that. We're just going to leave it as anonymous in the default for us. But here's the next thing that's really neat for me, because I've done a lot with REST APIs and having to do different header authentication and things like that. But imagine having the ability to bring in a request header and either override that or augment an additional request header into that. You have that ability right here. You see it in the request headers. You can put in the key, the value, and choose whether you want to override. Default would simply be to augment. So you can really work with this still without even having to go into the Jitterbit Studio. So that's what we've got there. I'll go ahead and click next and move on. And so now we've got the services defined here. We've got current price, historical close, no security profile, no request headers on this, but we did talk about it, so hopefully you got a glimpse of that. And I'll go ahead and save and publish. So there we go. Our proxy's live. That easy. We just drop in the URL, say what services we want to work with, and now I can take, say, the current price, I can copy that URL, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Postman, and I'm just going to open up a new tab. And we'll drop that URL here. We'll see if this is synced out to the API gateway just yet. Looks like it already has. And we can go to JSON here and see that formatted a little bit better. By the way, this tool right here, if you've never used this and you're working with APIs, I'd highly recommend checking out the Postman tool. It really makes designing integrations with APIs really a lot simpler, because you can get into the nitty-gritty. You can see the data that's behind the API in this way, and then just simply be able to move that back and forth to the studio. So if you can mock it up here, then build it in the studio. If you need to do that, it's a great way. So sorry for the bunny trail there, but it's always a good thing to mention. So here we go. In this one, what we've got is we've got the time. When was this actually updated? And then we can come down and say, okay, well here we have the Bitcoin price index for US dollars, and we see that amount there. We have it for the British pounds, and we have it for the euro. So these are the 3 currencies that this API gives us back. We'll talk a little bit more on this a little bit later, but notice the URL. This is on the Jitterbit.net API gateway. So we've now proxied this API. Now, over here we see the tab with the original. Nothing's changed with the data. We've passed the data through exactly as it came from the original API, but now it's proxied through our scenarios. And if we go over, what we should be able to do is come over here into the management console, and it may show up on our activity logs. I put it in debug modes. We'll see if it gets there. Let's see if it pulls through. Logged me out. So we'll log back in, and we'll take a look there. Let's see here. But that's the thing, is we should be able to see every bit of this now within the management console in the activities log, because I did put it in debug mode, so it should show up here. Because it's a proxy, actually thinking back on this, we may not see it in the activity log. We may only see this in the API log because it doesn't call a Jitterbit operation. So yep, there it is. We don't see it there, but if we do go back to the API manager and the API logs, let's see it here. This is where it will show up. There it is.
There you go.
So there we get to see it. That's the one right there that we called, and we can see all of that detail. So if you were just exposing the original API, maybe you don't have this level of detail with your logging. You've got a back-end API, something like that. This gives you that ability to proxy that through. So that is the basic API proxy functionality. Now you can do some other things. You can go into the portal manager if you've played around with that any. It's where you can document in the open API standards, and you could drop in YAML for that definition, and you could have that same proxy show up in your API documentation portal, which is a really neat feature as well. So you can have one consolidated place to document all of your APIs and be able to interact with those. So that's API Proxy.
Okay, cool. So that's how we build the API Proxy and some other little things along the way there. But are there any other added benefits to leveraging that service?
Yeah, so we mentioned several of them, but you've got the security, you've got the documentation portal out there, and we could actually take a look at that real quick. Here we go to Portal Manager, and so we see there's none here. We're going to initialize our portal, and you can walk through this. Now that's for our default environment. Let's switch it over. So if you've never seen this, this is a nice quick little glimpse into it. But there we have just the default. Now I do have, let me just go back here real quick. I went ahead and mocked up the YAML for this one, and we'll see if we can drop it in and see what that would look like. So let's see here. Let's just come back to this one. We'll see if we can drop that in. We've got a little indentation issue, I do believe. That's where it should be. And so then what I can do is I can just begin to modify this. But you see it's starting to show up here in the doc portal.
Sure.
So that's one of the big little value adds that you can have out here. Again, being able to filter out and only expose certain services.
Sure.
Those are all great things there.
Yep. Okay.
But we do have another scenario that comes up sometimes. And that's what if we need to add data to an API?
Sure.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of that other example I want to show you, and I told you I had a project built for it. Now, like I said, we've always been able to essentially proxy APIs by doing that in the design studio. But this is one of the things that really differentiates using a tool like Jitterbit to do your API management versus just a standard API proxy platform, is because we have all of the integration capabilities. So let me show you an example. Let's say we wanted to go back and do something a little different. Let's see if I just get back to my API manager here. But if we look back at Postman, if you recall, we had 3 currencies.
That's right.
That were returned from that API. What if we wanted to add some through our API proxy? Well, we can't do that through the standard API proxy feature like we just showed, but we can do it through building an API around it. This is how we would do it. Now this is one I mocked up quickly here before we went in, but let me show you what I'm doing. These 3 steps right here are Bitcoin source. If I'll open that up, let you see, that's that current price.json. That's that original API.
Okay.
Okay? So we have that. That's going to call and bring back a JSON response, which we're going to be able to handle here in the transformation. My target is an API response. So I've already built this to where it can handle being exposed as a standard Jitterbit API.
Okay.
Now let's look at the transformation. Inside the transformation, there I have the same source structure that we saw in Postman. The US dollars, the British pound, and the euro. On the target side though, I've modified the JSON that I used for this. And if you notice, there's US dollars, there's British pounds, there's euro, but I've added another currency. I just chose Canadian dollar just because, no real reason. But what I've done here is I went through and I statically mapped some of these in the formula builder. So code, I mapped that over, again, just static string. Okay. In symbol, I did the same thing. But in rate and rate float, if you look, I'm using some calculations. Now let me back up. I'll show you where this comes from. I'm using two variables. I'm using bitcoin.usd and exchange.cad. So the first one that I mentioned is up here. So from the US dollar, I pull that rate that's coming from the original API. What is the current US dollar rate? That's what this particular API is built on. And so I just assign that to the bitcoin.usd global variable. So once I have that, I can use it down here to calculate, and all I need now is my exchange rate. Now where do I get my exchange rate? Well, I call another API. We can't do this with a standard API proxy, right? But with Jitterbit, I created another operation that's going to call a different API. In this case, api.exchangeRates.api.io is what I'm calling here, with a base of US dollar. And what that gives me back is a list of various exchange rates. So I'll expand this out, let you take a look. There we see it. And again, just a one-to-one mapping, nothing fancy on the mapping, but notice here on the Canadian dollar, I used a formula builder and I captured that to exchange.cad. So I'm capturing my exchange rate. I'm calling that, we mentioned this, if you guys recall back to a previous tech talk that we did where we talked about reusability and having controller scripts. I did something similar to that here. I used this little exchange rate script. All this does is do a run operation. There you see it, run operation, exchange rates, and it calls that at the start of it, gets that exchange rate tied into a global variable. I can then use that in this transformation to augment this additional data into this API. So how does this all come about? Well, let's make sure it's deployed out. You've seen how the operation's built. Let's go build the API around it and see the final result. So here we go, back into the API manager. And once we're out here, now rather than doing the API proxy, we'll see that one sitting out there. But this time we're going to do a new API. So there is the Bitcoin proxy that we did.
Sure.
Here we'll do new API. Let it all load up here. And let's see, what do we want to name this one, Jared?
Maybe Canadian, what was it, the Canadian currency that you were doing there?
Sure, we'll call it Bitcoin CAD. How about that?
Sure.
So here we go. Bitcoin CAD. We'll just do that right there. Nothing too fancy. We'll put in the environment. We've got our service root. That's fine. We'll put our version in here as well. And of course, we can always do a description. I'll go ahead and enable cores. We'll get to see some of that on this one here. Enable the debug. Again, just standard practice for me. We'll choose next. And now I'll go in and say, okay, there's my project. Here is my operation. My method is going to be a get. My response type is going to be final target. And I'll assign that operation. I could assign more here for other methods if I had other needs to do that, but that's what I'll do for now. Click next. Again, I'll leave the security profile off for now, but you know what you can do with that. It's powerful. I don't really ever recommend doing an API without a security profile in a production scenario. But again, for our purposes, we're just going to continue. So we'll do that, and then we will save and publish. So now we have a URL. We'll copy that. But here's what I want to do next is this view edit documentation. So here we get to see, I'll go through and I'll regenerate my documents. It's going to go through and actually read that JSON. And now we see here, we have that get Tech Talk v1 Bitcoin CAD. I can expand that. And here's the cool thing is because I enabled cores, not only do I see the documentation, but now I can do this try it out feature. And so rather than going into Postman, of course, we could do that as well. But I'll just execute this here. Let's see if the API has synced yet. And it looks like we've got a response here. You see it right in here. And look down there at the bottom. Now we have augmented data into our API and done that calculation on the fly. So you see US dollar, 4,062 and some change. And Canadian, according to this calculation, is 5,400 and some change. So that's a really cool example, I think, because a lot of the API management stuff out there can't do this. You have to have an integration tool to be able to work in it in that scenario. And so this gives us that ability to where we can use API proxy when we need to. We can do traditional APIs direct from, say, our backend databases living on premise, something else like that. You can create those APIs, business process APIs, or if you need to do something like what I've done here. You've got an API that's existing, but you need to augment some additional data into that. Well, now you know a way that you can do it. So hopefully this is beneficial to some of you. But those are the examples that I wanted to show. I think. Do we have any questions come through yet, Jared?
Well, we did have one question come through, and it was in regards to a different topic. When an agent goes down, how do they know about that?
Mm-hmm.
I believe over in the management console, you can, activate that. If Corey, I don't know if you want to show that maybe on screen, where you can have an email sent to you, or notify you rather, when your agent goes down, when it comes back up, etc.
Yeah. So like I said, we will. We're here to answer questions, obviously. So we'll go ahead and show that. And so let's see right here. If we go, so we've got the screen back up. If we go over here to notifications, let's see if it's going to. Yep, that's what I thought. It's going to log me out again. So we'll get logged back in if I can type my password correctly. Nobody else ever has that issue, though, do they? Everybody always types their password correctly the first time, except for me. Yeah, I know that's not true. Hopefully you guys chuckled at that. But here we go. So let's see. Not API Manager. Management Console. There we go. Notifications. This is where you want to go. So when an agent goes down, you want to be notified. This is where, by default, and this is a brand new org, so this is default. Sure. By default, you get this password expiration. But if you can do a new notification right there, agent down, agent available, and you can say, okay, I don't have any private agents set up, but if you have a private agent, you select that agent, your duration, what type, and who the recipients are going to be, and you can get that out there. So that's how you would do that agent down notification or agent available notification, password expire, all of that right there in the management console. So hopefully that helps you out a little bit.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you guys have any other questions, like you said there, not even related to our topic, we don't care. We're here to talk tech with you, so if you've got questions, send them on over, and I'm going to pull mine up here so I can see as they come through. Here's one that came through. Can you show an example of an OAuth proxy API? I'm not set up for that, to be honest with you. I would love to show that, but here's what I can tell you about the OAuth on the security profiles. I'll talk through it as much as I can here. But if you've got specific questions around that, or you need to see a specific example, let us know, and we'll get you synced up with somebody to go through it. But here's what I can tell you about OAuth: is that OAuth on the Jitterbit security profile side of things, the identity providers that are supported there today are Google and Salesforce.com. Okay, so essentially it's almost, I hate to use this word, okay, but being that I have worked with a lot of REST APIs in the past, it is a little bit different because, like, say for instance, we're doing a Google API. Google uses OAuth 2. And they are the identity provider. They handle the all the keys and whatnot back there. What we do is we essentially use them almost as like a single sign-on provider. It's not technically single sign-on, but it's using those setups as the identity provider. And so they're able to essentially connect to your API using that authentication, things like that. So hopefully that helps you a little bit. Again, if you've got a specific scenario you want to see, let us know, and we'll get you synced up with somebody to go through that. But hopefully that answers just a little bit there. Let's see here. Just looking through. So here's one that I'll talk about real quick here. When would we use an API proxy instead of using the Design Studio? It's a great question. And here is really the crux of it, is that, say for instance, you have already existing APIs. You have APIs that are already existing. Maybe they are, if they're already in the Jitterbit platform, it doesn't necessarily make sense to proxy that again. But let's say you've had another, you've got another platform sitting back behind your firewall. You've exposed that out through your DMZ. It's working. It does what it needs to do. You don't want to decommission it, but you want to bring that into your new API structure before you go through and kind of redesign the whole API. That could be a scenario. So that's really where it mostly fits, is when you already have existing APIs, but you don't have the monitoring, the logging, the security tools that you have inside of the Jitterbit platform, and you want to enhance that API with that, so you have one consolidated platform, or just the fact that you want to have one consolidated platform for all your APIs.
Sure, yeah.
I'll be honest, it's not a fit for everybody or every situation, but it's another tool, it's a newer feature, so we wanted to get it out there, let you guys know about it, so you can make that decision on whether it makes sense to you or not. Now, as far as when you want to use a proxy versus using the studio, like what I did, if you don't need to modify the data, then I would just use the proxy. If you have the potential of needing to modify the data, like we did with the augmentation of the Canadian dollar, then you would obviously want to go into the studio. So hopefully that answers that there. Let's see. There was another question here. I'm going to ask for a little clarification about being tied into a managed API proxy. And I think what you're asking is, could we go back and kind of tie that into the original API? But feel free, please send a follow-up on that question. But basically, again, if you have to interact with the data, like we did with the Canadian, then you would need to bring that into the studio and do it from there, not from the standard proxy. So once it's in the proxy, all that's doing is passing the data through as is. Headers we can work with, but that's all that we can do there. Beyond that, you have to come into the studio itself to modify that data. Now, obviously, we could go in and say that other API that we're hitting for the currency exchange, we could expose that as a proxy also. That's pretty easy to do. Just didn't really have a need to in this scenario. So I hope that answered the question. Please send a follow-up if it didn't. We want to make sure we get you good answers through there. Okay, well, that's all the questions we have right now. But we've got some other things we want to talk about.
Yeah,
Give people some more time if you have questions. Again, we're here as long as you have questions. We can show you some more stuff, go into some things as needed. But didn't you have a good announcement about Jitterbit University?
Yeah, we do have some exciting news. I think last time we may have mentioned some expectations around some new courses that might be coming out pretty soon. And we just released a new Connecting to Salesforce course. So we hope you all can take advantage of that. So if you're signed up for Jitterbit University, you already have an account, you can actually just go ahead and log in out there and visit the catalog and then enroll yourself in that course. We're estimating it would probably take about 3 hours. That is an estimation right now. But it's going to walk through all of the different ways using Jitterbit that we can leverage and connect to Salesforce or your Salesforce instance. So a lot of good material out there. We also coming in the next couple of weeks, probably, we are in the beta QA process, releasing a course on API management and creation. I guess I should say API creation and management is the proper thing there. But that's going to be really exciting.
And we're going to be talking about API Proxy in there.
That's correct. So lots of good stuff that is being released now and that's to come. So really exciting time. There's also a few other next steps. That's what we're really about here at Jitterbit, is giving you the next step in your your integration lifecycle, I guess you could say. So we have things like Success Central. I think we'll pop that up on screen there, where you can go and dive into our documentation. We have Jitterbit University, which I mentioned there just a moment ago, and then the community, which is where you get to go out and cast your ballot as to what you want to see in Jitterbit and your ideas and whatnot. And if it's popular enough and the demand is there, we'll definitely try to implement that. So lots of great next steps for each and every person here.
So Jared, I had a question come in, I believe it was yesterday, about the Salesforce course. And I'll bring up Jitterbit University here in a moment and show that. But if somebody was coming on and they don't really have any Jitterbit experience, but they need to do Salesforce integration, where should they start?
Well, we would recommend that you start, it is really hard to answer a lot of these questions because, if you have, maybe you're not familiar with Jitterbit, but you have an integration background, we all pick up and learn a little differently. But typically, we would recommend that you start with foundations. That's kind of the best practice. Start with foundations, learn about how to integrate using the Jitterbit platform, and then you can move on into, something maybe a little more advanced like Jitterbit Core or maybe our Salesforce course. But in my opinion, it's best to start with foundations and then work your way into it.
Yeah, and I would agree, because when you're going through foundations, that's when you're going to learn sources and targets and transformations and
Sure.
the basics of the formula builder, and then you can go into core and learn the more of the best practices side of things, and then go into Salesforce. Now we're covering primarily the connector and the connector functionality there, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So we're not getting into use cases.
Correct. Yeah. It is a large part of that is based around the connectors. But like Corey said, it can be challenging at times, and for me at least, one of the most challenging things is lingo, because you have this space is a really big space, and lingo can throw you for a loop, in my opinion. So nevertheless, I think it's best to start with foundations and work your way into those other levels of knowledge there.
Since we have a moment, let's go ahead and switch over to my screen here, and let me just show you a little bit of the course, just so you know what's out there, what to expect. If you decide to go through this course, if you find that it may be a benefit to you, welcome and introduction. We talk about different methods of integration. We talk about the different wizards. And so, how do you set up an org? How do you do a query, an upsert, insert, update? How do you do deletes? How do you do bulks? And we talk in there about, where should we do bulk? Where should we do the standard API, things like that. Different Salesforce specific functions. Then we go into some more specific scenarios where we talk about like the wave analytics, which Wave Analytics is what it's always been called. Salesforce changes its name about every year, it seems.
Sure.
I think now it's just called. Now it's called Einstein Analytics. So we may need to update that. But outbound messages, how do we do that? And that crosses into API, OData API, best practices, external ID, success failure. I mean, it just goes on and on. So it gives you a glimpse of what's out there if you find that may be a benefit for you. But it's out there in the course catalog. And if you have a Jitterbit University account, you can register for that today. If you don't, then reach out to your customer success manager, get your enrollment key, and then you can sign up.
Perfect. Yeah, and also kind of, this is this series of Tech Talk. We're a good bit into this, but maybe you want to go and review some older Tech Talks. You can also get those at Success Central. We have our Tech Talk library that you can go out there and view the video. So yeah, Mike can throw that on screen there for you all to see. You see on the right-hand side all of the different videos that you can access and brush up on as we go through this Tech Talk journey. So.
Well, I saw a few other questions come in, and I appreciate those because we are here for your questions. One was, is Jitterbit planning any sort of user events, user conference, regional, national, things like that? It is something that is being talked about. And so I don't have any definitive plans at this point that I've heard, but I have heard that it is roadmapped. It is something that we are planning on. I don't know what the scale is necessarily. It's not necessarily our immediate topic area that we work within, but I have heard of some of that's going to be coming out. So hopefully that'll come out, and who knows, maybe Jared and I can get out there and get face to face with you guys on some of that as well. Another one here came through about other authentication providers with the OAuth proxy API. Today, what is supported is the Google and the Salesforce.com. There has been some talk about bringing in some others, but they're not there today. I don't know exactly where that stands on the roadmap. Again, a little outside of our direct area. But I've got your question here, so what I can do is I can get that sent over. Let me mention something else here. We haven't really talked about the ideas portal.
No, we didn't. That's a good
point. So this really could be something perfect to put out on the ideas portal, right?
Sure. Yeah. So going back to that whole conversation on next steps, you can go and check out the community, and all you need to do is log in if you don't have an account, create that, and then you can access that ideas portal and place ideas like that right in there.
Yeah. But we've got the comment, so we will get that passed along as well. But I would encourage you, if you do have ideas, suggestions like that, where you don't see it in the product, you'd love to see it in the product, go to the community, go into the ideas portal, and put that in there. Okay?
Perfect.
Well, I don't see any other questions.
I don't either. So if you have any questions, maybe after this, feel free to follow up with us at training@jitterbit.com, and we'll do our best to answer the question, get you an answer in some form or fashion. But once again, we appreciate each and every one of you taking the time out of your day. We know how busy you are, and we hope we've added some value today in today's Tech Talk. So, Corey, thanks again for all your work and expertise here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jared.
All right, take care, guys. See you.
Have a great day.